people are thinking or feeling. But they're really not hard topics because as Catholics, we believe that all of these issues that we end up speaking about in our homilies is based upon our understanding of faith and our understanding of who this Jesus is, the beginning and the end, his death into new life. And therefore, the hard topics that we end up speaking about is nothing more than our understanding, our social Catholic teaching about what is it that the Catholic Church says we should be, because we're not there yet. So preaching on the hard topics. Remember, preaching is to inspire as well as to inform. A lot of times when we move to an issue like abortion, or we move to an issue like assisted suicide, we tend to want to inform people. And information is important, but not nearly as important as having that relationship with the risen Christ. And that's what our preaching is really all about. We want our people to do something after they listen to it, and the question is your heart aflame to do something with this issue? Hard topics. Here are some of them that I wrote down. Anything else that I've missed? When you are preaching, what other hard topic do you say, man, I struggle with this? Anything I'm missing? Yes, Sean? In vitro fertilization, the whole sexual reproduction aspect. Good. Yes, please. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Transgender. Absolutely. Again, that whole sexual understanding is really one of the most difficult things that we are facing, in my opinion, because it's so alien to us as Catholics. It doesn't quite fit. It's certainly not the theology that we've learned. Anything else?
Mass tragedy, like the October 1st.
Absolutely. And that one should have been up there. I wasn't even thinking because I'm not a Las Vegas person. Had I been, that might have been the first one. How many of you preached the weekend after on this topic?
Shooting.
Tough thing to do, and yet I think needed to be done. Because I'm guessing the churches were full. I'm just guessing. Usually when there's a tragedy, the churches get full. So hard topics. This is what Bishop Thomas wrote in his installation homily. Holiness of life is the vocation of every Christian and flows from the grace of baptism. Through baptism, they carry out their own part in the mission of the church. And the mission of the church is to take on these hard topics. When we preach against racism, it's not simply because it's a nice thing to talk about, and that you and I are equal because we are God's children, and you just have a different skin color than I do, and you have a different culture than I do, and we're just nice that way. That's not the purpose of our preaching. The purpose of our preaching is to bring all of that out so that our people, as they go forth, live non-racist lives. They live like Christ. And that's the point of talking about these things. Then he wrote in signpost number 2, the call to holiness is accompanied by a commensurate call for shared responsibility. Pope Benedict raised the ante, insisting that the laity are commissioned to share in the saving work of the gospel. All the hard topics are very much part of this co-responsibility. Catholic social justice preaching. For us, there are 2 reasons: Scripture and tradition. And in Scripture and tradition, we find the Church's teachings on all the issues that we have. Biblical justice. The working definition that I come to out of biblical justice has to do with the right ordering of all relationships. When you think of racism, it really is a non-relational thing. If I am white and I say I am superior, I'm not in right relationship with God's children. I'm not in right relationship with God. There's a flaw, and therefore, this issue is worthy of being talked about. Assisted suicide, the whole notion that out of compassion, we're going to let this person or give that person permission to kill themselves. We would say, wait a minute, we understand as Catholics that God continues to work with us till the moment we die and even beyond. I am never more convinced of that as I was this past summer. A member of my community, who was my best friend, had pancreatic cancer, and I was privileged to be there with him in his final 2 months of life. And in walking with him, it was so fascinating to watch what I know God was doing with him. And it was beautiful. And it was very Christian. And so that experience just helps me to be even more alive that assisted suicide is nothing more than fake news. Helping people to die well. And so we're trying to get people to be in right relationship with God, our brothers and sisters, and even those that we do not consider our brothers and sisters, with the entire created world. Here's just a couple of quotes. There are no throwaway people, no second-class citizens, no disposable souls. Racism is an affront to the life of the community and a grave sin that calls us out of the heavens or calls out to the heavens for redress. Wherever anyone is deprived of the right to life, society is poor, basic values are compromised, and every human life is devalued and made more vulnerable. Do you all know where that comes from? Now, I get no extra money because I'm quoting your bishop, but this is something that I would hope the week after it came, everybody could have used in a homily. One of those quotes is a great introduction or a great conclusion to a homily. But even as great as Bishop Thomas's quotes are, they are not the homily. They point to the one who gives us this. And they point to Jesus, our Christ. Because God says this. This is how we understand our God. And this is why it's worthy of preaching. Also, here was your SB 165 quote. Most people in our society, regardless of their faith background, realize that prevailing doctors to prescribe lethal medication in direct conflict to a doctor's duty to do no harm and to treat the ill and vulnerable to the best of their ability. Again, this was a little letter that was sent out to all of you. Right in here, that little letter is worthy of an introduction or a conclusion of a homily. Always pointing back to what God is doing. Our parishes and our cultures are not in right relationships. But we also must recognize that we too are not in right relationships. As holy as we are, as prayerful men as we are, every time we get up to preach, we have to deal with our own experiences of life. I always say this little brief story simply because it's a reality of my own life. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Being born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, there was always a divide between Caucasians and African Americans. In the 1960s, when I was born, all of my friends and all of my family, our extended family, used the N-word like you wouldn't imagine. It was just part of growing up in St. Louis in 1969. We were never allowed to use it in my particular family. But I also know that I've got a lot of that garbage in my life because of where I grew up. I think I'm a better man now than I was when I was 12. But these issues are part of us. And we always work with them through God's grace. Because I recognize I'm not always in perfect relationship. That doesn't mean we don't preach. So the biblical justice for our Jewish brothers and sisters, they really worked under the quid pro quo. God had called them, and therefore they must do something. Biblical justice for Christians is always about compassion and mercy. I must go beyond quid pro quo. I must keep working on my ministry. I must keep growing through these hard topics. It makes me a better man, a better Christian. So we have compassion and mercy, and that's signpost number 5. We love as Jesus did, no more, no less. The problem with that sentence is Jesus loved to the cross. Do Christians love to the cross? It is not based on the quid pro quo. It's more about self-giving. I'm aware that we are nearing the end, but I want to talk specifically about the hard topics when we put it into context of our preaching. I think the biggest flaw that we have, number one, is fear. We're afraid. We're afraid. We're afraid of many different obstacles. We're afraid that things are not what the popular culture believed. The whole business about two men being married, two women being married, and if we say something about that, I know that there are parishioners that have children who are homosexual and in married relationships. I know if I say something, I might offend them. Don't work on offense. Work on compassion and mercy, but also work on what the church positively says. About a month ago, we had the scripture passage, maybe it was more than a month ago, and Jesus was talking about marriage. As God created man and woman, I'm just simply repeating what God says. That's where we stand. The whole business about saying it's wrong for two men to be married, it's wrong, really isn't needed. Simply by saying this is what marriage is this. Same thing with any of the issues that we have. Same thing with the hard issues that come about our lives. Where is God when a tragedy happens? I tell the story about that, and I'm trying to remember on the East Coast what school it was, but I believe it was a Mennonite school. And this was before a lot of different shootings that came in. But the Mennonite school had a crazy person come in and shoot away 12, 13, 14 people, children. But that community, a month later, decided they could not build walls around their institutions, around their homes, because walls would keep their brothers and sisters out. I use that as an image of how people heal. Now trust me when I say, I have parishioners yell at me. How dare you tell me Trump can't build his wall? I didn't say anything about the wall at the southern border. I simply said what the Mennonites said. But it was also what we Catholics believe. Don't be alarmed when people are angry because they don't like what the church stands for. In the same token, don't shove it in people's faces. Gently bring up the issue. Gently tell us where Christ is in it. And that's one of the reasons why at the beginning of a church calendar year, I go through and look for the hard places I might want to preach. Because it takes a little bit more preparation. Almost a little bit more where I know I need to steel myself. Because if I'm going to say something that might be hard, I have to be ready with great love to hear the other side. And I think it's only fair that we learn to listen and not to be offensive by it. A quick thought about preaching on money, because I know that is also a hard topic. It's not a social justice topic necessarily. Money is an important aspect of every institution, and there is always a place for money, but not in every home. Cardinal Mahoney is famous for his Together in Mission. Together in Mission raises millions of dollars every year in which basically the wealthy parishes take care of the less than wealthy parishes. It's a huge diocese. And in Los Angeles, you have millionaires all over the place, and you have the poorest of the poor. And his Together in Mission is really a beautiful thing. But I always tell them, and I had Cardinal Mahoney right in front of me with a bunch of bishops, and I said to them, I said, you cannot send out your letter in which all you talk about on that Sunday is money. Because when you don't move it to what God invites us to do, on that Sunday, our God is money. Now you can imagine what a little priest gets when the cardinal says, I disagree. I said, you can disagree, cardinal, but when money is all we talk about, that's a flaw. But, cardinal, there are scripture readings that we use that do talk about the generosity of a community, that do talk about taking care of the poor, that do encourage the most wealthy to be good, that are beautifully Christian. Why does a homily have to be a letter instead of what Jesus invites us to be? There is always scripture passages there that we can talk about that money issue. So I will throw that at you because I'm leaving in an hour. And if Bishop doesn't like that, that's okay. You can say the crackpot's gone. But I always say every hard topic begins and ends at the copula, the Holy Sepulchre. Because the only reason it's hard is because it's hard for us. We struggle with that. But when we turn back to our faith and what Scripture is saying and what the church is teaching, it's really not that difficult. Especially if we're ready for people to disagree with us. This is where I'd like to conclude because we are at that time, and Bishop Gordon would like to have a few words. But before I give up my microphone, is there anything that I can help you with